Good morning and welcome to conference. My name is Emma Hoddinott and I'm one of two Co-op Party Assistant General Secretaries called Emma. You saw my colleague Emma Foodie yesterday, an absolutely great job she did and a really good conference start yesterday. Today is my first day back from maternity leave and it's great to be back on day 2 of our Building Community Power conference. This morning, I'll be acting as your host, which means you'll get to hear from me throughout the morning. I'll be introducing our amazing speakers that we've got this morning, as well as making sure you get to put your questions to them as well. This conference, it's all about building community power. We'll be looking at political empowerment and the shift of power from Westminster into communities. At the Co-op Party, it's about doing things with people rather than to them, and widening ownership of our economy to tackle inequality as well. We're holding our conference again online, which means we've been able to have a bigger programme, and you'll get to hear more this morning about how you can get involved with the Co-op Party and some of the further events this week. You'll also get to hear from Sarah Longlands of CLES, and we have Scottish Labour leader Anna Sarwar later on this morning as well. And we've also showcasing some really innovative and interesting co-ops and community ideas from across the UK. I used to be the local government officer for the Co-op Party. I know there's some amazing work happening up and down the country, and you're going to hear some of those ideas and solutions. We're not waiting for Westminster. We can hear about people doing things now. And throughout the morning, we don't want you to just sit and listen to us, and we want to hear from you as well. So on the conference page, you will see the chat function. Throughout this morning, you can put questions in the chat, put questions to our speakers as well, and there's a chance to take part in interactive policy and campaigning sessions as well this afternoon. But before we get on with today and hear from our speakers, I want to pass you on to my boss, our General Secretary, and that is Joe Fortune.
Thanks very much, Emma. And as you say, day one back at work. Welcome back, Emma, straight back into the hot seat. I know that people around the country will be absolutely delighted to see you back in our team. And I wish you the best for today. Look, friends, conference, we had a great day yesterday. Some fantastic speakers in debate, but we had over 1,000 people logging on. Right around the country, involved in building community power themselves, involved in the Co-operative Party, involved in the cooperative movement as well. I'm hugely excited for today as well. As you've just said, we've got a fantastic programme ahead of us. Building community power is what our party and our movement is all about. It's what the country needs, and 70% of us believe is currently lacking. To help build that community power, we need to continue to build our party as well. We had a cohort of new members join us yesterday, and welcome if you're one. We need more. We need to continue building our party. So if there's one thing to do today, conference friends, right around the country, make sure you're highlighting membership, you're highlighting the work that the cooperative party is doing. Make sure you're sharing our join links, www.party.coop/join. Make sure that this is a moment in time where people really hear that cooperative message very loud and clear. Other than that, make sure you're on the hashtag CoopConf21. Make sure we're involved in the discussion on social media all the way through the day. But thank you very much for the opportunity just to say hello to conference this morning, and I wish you the best of luck. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe, and great to hear about so many people joining us and that we're growing as a movement. I'm going to now move on to our first speaker of this morning, which is Sarah Longlands. She is Chief Executive of CLES, and CLES is the Centre for Local Economic Strategies. They describe themselves as a think and do tank, where their policy is informed by practice. And Sarah has a lot of expertise in regional and local economic development. So really looking forward to hearing about that. Just a reminder, you can put questions to Sarah in the chat, but without further ado, over to you, Sarah.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Emma, and thank you, Joe. It's I'm a huge fan of the Co-operative Party, so it's a huge honour to be asked to speak at your annual conference. And a big congratulations to Emma You're so brave doing this in the first week of being back from maternity leave. I remember those days, and congratulations. So as Emma said, I am the Chief Executive of CLES, the Centre for Local Economic Strategies, and we describe ourselves as the national organisation for local economies. And what we are interested in is how we create better economies. And for us, that is about economies which generate wealth rather than have wealth extracted from them. And this morning, I want to tell you a little bit about community power from our perspective and why it's important, and how we at CLES see community power through the lens of community wealth building. Because for us, community power is economic power. And I'll go on to tell you a little bit about the journey that we've been on over the last 35 years of our history, and how we've begun and developed new ideas around community wealth building and community power. And I also want to touch as well on the political context for the debate. You know, what do you need to help community power thrive? I think we probably know quite a lot about what we don't need, but just to kind of touch on the moment that we're in at the moment, and what we actually need to ensure that we can make the most of the progressive gaps at the current time and really push the agenda from the inside out. So just to kind of begin by telling you a little bit about CLES and where we've come from on this journey. So our work at CLES began back in the 1980s, when a number of councils came together with a real shared belief in the power of place and of local institutions like councils to try and change things. And it was at a time when councils and their partners were under a lot of pressure because of the way in which the austerity regime at that time was being pushed through, and the way in which the economy was changing. And the idea was to establish an organisation which would help to support and help support areas through the big changes that were happening, and specifically to create better ways of doing economic development. Because there was a realisation that the way in which economic power was shifting was often detrimental to people's lives. And over the last 35 years, we've seen how the mantra of orthodox economics has continued to roll out alongside austerity, and often underpinned by a belief that aggregate economic growth will trickle down and that a rising tide will lift all boats. And that is something that I have been struck by throughout my career. So I started my career in economic development. I've been kind of working in it ever since. And no matter where you go, no matter which town or city you speak to, often the explicit goal is about achieving economic growth, because there is an assumption that if we get that level of economic growth, particularly at aggregate economic growth at a national level, everyone will automatically benefit eventually. But the real challenge of that for me is, what if growth never does come to your community or your town? And what do you do in the meantime while you're waiting for this great white horse of growth to come over the hill? You still need to deliver services. People still need decent jobs. They still need support to raise their families, and they still need decent services like healthcare and education. And they still need money to be able to spend in the local area. So we talk at CLES about the need for economic development rather than growth, because for us it's about qualitative change and about making people the focus of our economic strategy. And that's encapsulated for us in the idea of building community wealth, about building local wealth in our economy. And that's where more of the economy is owned by the people living in an area, so that the benefits contribute directly to improving lives, where the economy is no longer abstract and remote, but connected to our democratic system, where there are opportunities for debate, critique, and discussion about our economy and how to make it work better. And ultimately about creating an economy which is generative rather than extractive, where you build wealth from within through local businesses, community organisations, cooperatives, local ownership, rather than solely rely upon inward investment through multinational companies and absentee landlords who have little or no connection to your place. And we believe that provides the opportunities to create better, decent jobs and better lives for people at the end of the day. And we talk about community wealth building having kind of three main principles or pillars, for want of a better word. And this gives you a way of trying to think about how you start to deliver community wealth building in your own area. And I'm sure much of this will resonate with many of you who are already doing this work around the UK. But the first kind of key pillar, if you like, is around spend and procurement. So for us, local authorities and how they spend their money and how they interact with the economy is absolutely fundamental. And we think that in many areas, the local authority, the local state will be one of the most important employers and buyers of goods and services. So how can we make sure that it's not just about what we spend, but how we spend that money is actually delivering benefits to the local economy and to people in that area? And how can you use that spend to really support a much more diverse economy through the procurement process? So that's the first. The second then is around workforce, and how can you use your employing power to, again, prioritise decent jobs and prioritise good wages and opportunities for progression. Thirdly, around finance. So often the financial system in this country is extremely extractive. So how do you start to re-engineer it, rewire it to ensure that the flows of private finance actually find themselves in going back into a local area? And how can you ensure that by diversifying your economy, you can make that happen? And what is the role of the state in helping to catalyse that process? Fourthly, around land and property. So absolutely fundamental to the economy and often, again, very extractive. How can you make sure that we're democratising the way in which land and property is used by making better use of assets and derelict land, about using the planning system creatively to try and open up opportunities for communities and for businesses so that we can really allow some of the wealth from land and property to come back into a place, and also, of course, make better use of the land and property that already exists so that actually the benefits of how that land and property is used actually remain. And finally, the fifth pillar is all about ownership, because for us, inclusive ownership is fundamental. Who owns the economy in this country and who benefits from it is really the starting block for any discussion about a better economic approach in future. And that's what we're starting to see a lot of interest in amongst the organisations that we work with across the UK. How do we really start to diversify ownership? How do we ensure that our places aren't simply owned by the largest organisations who perhaps don't necessarily have the interests of that place at heart? So for us, that's absolutely fundamental. And ownership has been at the heart of community wealth building all along, since its inception 10, 12 years ago. So for example, in Cleveland, Ohio, where a lot of community wealth building began, the city there realized that the combined wealth of the city's institutions were worth around $3 billion. And yet very little of that was going back into the local economy. And so they worked with their local community to develop a series of cooperative organisations which would employ and spend locally, including Evergreen Energy Solutions, the City Green Growers, and the Evergreen Cooperative Laundry. Another example of where it's happening is in Preston, which has long been an exemplar of where community wealth building is taking place. And in Preston, they are supporting the development of food and tech co-ops in the city through capacity support, but also by being the first customer, about using their procurement and expenditure power to really prioritise and build demand within the cooperative community in the city. Thirdly, around social care, which is a huge topic at the current time, we've been exploring in some of our work how a rethink of ownership models within the social care system could help raise pay and status, but also distribute power much more equally among workers, care receivers and their families. And that's never been more critical at a time when we know that local authorities who are trying to deliver home care contracts are finding themselves having to compete with very large multinationals. So that's some examples of where we're starting to see it roll out in the areas that we're working with. And actually in many areas, they're still at the start of this journey. and it'd be really interesting to explore with you how we could really bring them further along in the process of really democratising ownership in a much more fundamental way. And then finally, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the political context for the debate. And I think this is a really interesting area for wealth building and for community power, because there is something about the role of devolution. From our work in Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland, the move towards wanting to develop different ways of doing economics and a recognition of the power of ownership is particularly strong in the devolved nations and regions. I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's certainly, the appetite is certainly much stronger. So, for example, in Scotland, we have a real emphasis on community wealth building built into the process of government. So they've just appointed a new community wealth building minister, Tom Arthur, whose responsibility also includes public finance and planning. And we've been working with the Scottish Government on a series of pilots to look at community wealth building and how that can be improved in the longer term. And that has included lots of really interesting conversations with local authorities there about the nature of ownership. And sometimes you're just helping local councils and local partners to kind of get their head around ownership and start to help them realise the real potential for that in terms of jobs and in terms of a sense of control over local assets. In Wales, there's a real emphasis on the importance of foundational economy. So the sort of basic services that everyone needs to be able to live a decent life, and a recognition that in some areas that is the economy. And so how can we make that work much more effectively? And cooperatives are a key part of that conversation also. In Northern Ireland, there's a really keen interest in community anchor organisations. We're having conversations there with the Department of Communities about how ownership could be part of the conversation in that context also. And we are starting to see real interest in terms of the devolved authorities in England. And often devolution in England can be hamstrung by the fact that it's expected to deliver against a fairly kind of orthodox and flawed Treasury agenda. But there is real interest in community power and community wealth building. So, for example, just one example from north of Tyne, where they are developing a dedicated municipal financing model to help support the growth of cooperatives in their area. So I think, it's perhaps early days, but we are starting to see real interest and real opportunities to push this from a devolved perspective into the mainstream. The second thing I wanted to touch on in terms of political context is that the current government, they have been talking a lot of rhetoric about community power in the recent weeks. So published a pamphlet about trusting the people. And I wanted to just kind of, explore how helpful is that, and how do we need to think about this kind of this approach from government, which very much resonates with what we saw 10 years ago in terms of big society. And I feel for me that it's really what you've really got to look at is the economic power in this conversation. Because whilst there's a lot of rhetoric from the current government about trusting the people, about community power, about giving people a chance to take control over local services, for us, we cannot afford to ignore or downplay the questions about economic power, because we have a political and economic system which actively excludes people's interest. And our economic system just doesn't exclude people, but it reduces their sense of agency and their freedom to shape and influence their own lives and that of their communities. And I think, unfortunately, that is completely underestimated in the current government's narrative around community power. And for them, the community power agenda is also kind of goes hand in hand with a kind of market-led approach to running public services. So we would argue that community power needs to be about working alongside rather than as a replacement for the state, to kind of open debate, to make power transparent, and to democratise the economy. And that decent, well-funded public services are also a foundation for community power. And that community activism, deliberative democracy, the cooperative movement are all part of that alternative economic paradigm. And I think from what I've seen of the current government's agenda on community power, it's really quite different in terms of what it's trying to do. And then the third thing I wanted to mention to finish off really was just how important this movement is in the context that we're working in, because, you know, at the moment it's a really difficult economic and political context. You know, we've got the challenge of the pandemic, we've got the long-running inequality, which has been a feature of our society even before anyone ever heard of COVID-19. And we've also got, you know, a looming crisis in terms of the climate emergency. So real challenges, I think, for everyone, and often a sort of sense of paralysis in terms of what we can do about it. And I guess that is the most exciting thing about your work and about some of the work we do on community wealth building too, is that despite this political and economic context, community power gives us an opportunity to push for change despite the obstacles. And as Emma said, you know, not waiting for Westminster, but identifying the progressive gaps and using our collective power to open them up, to get the debate going, and ultimately, hopefully, to deliver a better future for people in our communities. So I hope that's been useful in terms of giving you a sense of some of the work we're doing on community wealth building. And I'd be really interested to hear if there's any questions or comments or thoughts. But thanks again. It's been a real pleasure to join you this morning.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and an awful lot for us to digest this morning, taking us all the way through community wealth building, some of the examples across the country, and then that political context as we go forward. And that's there's some questions actually coming in, and I'm keen to explore that and how we might move forward regards to sort of community power and empowering our communities around community wealth building. One of the questions, though, I just want to touch on for those new to community wealth building is this question that I often hear about: isn't community wealth building a zero-sum game? For example, with areas with bigger procurement spend win at the expense of others? If everybody keeps it local, actually, is everyone loses out from that kind of approach? So, and also there's a similar question as well about how you can ensure that procurement isn't just with sort of local businesses, but actually with co-ops, and is changing what is happening locally.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, really, really good questions, and one that and questions that we kind of grapple with. I think the first on the zero-sum game, I think there's an important point there to be made about, you know, how do we measure success in our economy? Is it simply down to the amount of money flowing in and out, or is it also down to some of the qualitative change that we want our money to achieve? So in terms of social and economic and environmental benefit. So on that, you know, that zero-sum game, it isn't just about, you know, how much money is collected or not in an area. It's also about, you know, how that money is being spent and the value that we also place on those wider benefits. So I think that's the first thing. And the second thing is that I think often community wealth building gets kind of, you know, sort of narrowed to this idea that it's just about local expenditure, and it's just about kind of, you know, keeping that money tight and kind of building a wall almost around your place. And I would absolutely refute that, because I would say that, you know, that is community wealth building, and the point about procurement spend, that is only one aspect of the of community wealth building. There are 5 different pillars. Spend and procurement is just one aspect of it, and it's often the one that people connect to most, particularly councils, because they can see the relevance in terms of their expenditure. But community wealth building is not about putting a wall up. It's not about that kind of protectionism, if you like. It's about recognizing that how we spend money and how we use money is just as important as how much you've got. And it's about actually much more important is about who you're spending that money with, rather than where they're based. And so the ownership question becomes really disproportionately large in that conversation, because making sure you've got a diversity of ownership, making sure you're spending money with a wider range of organisations is ultimately going to be much better in terms of the opportunities that provides for your area. And then on the question about cooperatives, this is also really fundamental. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that you know, local authorities or you know, public sector organisations always get it right. They don't, and there's a huge amount of work to be done on that. And for us, we always start from this to say, you know, understand what your expenditure is at the minute, understand where your money is going, And then there's a job to be done in terms of you just can't simply write it into the tender, although that's an important part of the process. But you need to actually engage with wider civil society, with cooperatives in your area to actually find out what the capacity to deliver is. And if there isn't capacity, then it's also about working with your partners, working with civil society to actually develop the capacity. So encouraging consortia, making sure that that's encouraged by the procurement process, and also building and supporting capacity wherever possible. And in that way, this becomes a process of not just delivering services, but actually actively creating a different type of economy. And I think that's the really exciting bit about it.
Yep. And can I just pick up a little bit about that theme of ownership? Because there's a couple of questions that have come through about sort of land ownership and the issues. This is an issue that we've been highlighting through our High Streets campaign, the issue of absent landlords on our high streets. You know, what can we do about these empty buildings going forward? And then Robert asks in particular about big companies buying up empty land in Scotland for carbon offsetting. You know, how do we ensure that green policies don't lead to land banking? So if you want to try and tackle those two, really, about that question of ownership and particularly land ownership.
Yeah, I mean, the land ownership stuff is kind of really critical to this, and it comes up a lot in the conversations that we have in different parts of the country. I mean, Scotland's interesting in that they are trying to deal with this head on with the Scottish Land Commission that's been established, and that is actively trying to explore what can we do to disrupt some of the kind of monopolies and land banking that we see in the Scottish context. And obviously in Scotland too, they have much, well, I mean, it'd be interesting to see what people think, but they do seem to have much stronger mechanisms for taking control of land, so the community right to buy, for example. And many local councils are actively supporting that process. I mean, many are not, but there's certainly some movement on that front. And I think the point about greed, you know, the kind of perverse incentives, I mean, we've seen that before in other contexts. And I mean, I think part of it is about the really short-term nature of the kind of the government's approach to climate change and climate emergency so far. You know, it's been very short-termism and very market-driven, and very much about, you know, trying to kind of quick fixes, if you like. So I think a longer-term, much more strategic approach to climate emergency from central government, I think, would certainly make a big difference to that. And actually, you know, there's a real responsibility there in the Scottish government to really intervene where we're seeing land, you know, simply swallowed up in the name of green finance. And I think some of those companies have been exploring how they can engage more effectively with civil society. But it's definitely, you know, I think anywhere where you see kind of land or property being swallowed up by single organisations in the name of a, you know, a greater social or economic or environmental benefit, that needs to be questioned, and there needs to be spaces where that scrutiny can take place.
Can I just ask you, Sarah, we're quickly running out of time, but there is just one question from Miranda.
Yeah.
I don't know whether you can answer it in that last minute, just picking up about the climate emergency, a really important issue that will be the focus towards the end of the year. She's asking, is economic growth really the answer? Does it fit with, you know, tackling the climate emergency?
Well, look, this is, you know, for me, it isn't the answer. You know, I'm not, you know, you need, in effect, what you need is an inclusive and sustainable economy. For too long, we focused on economic growth as the outcome, but forgot about the mechanism by which we achieve it. And there's no point having economic growth if it doesn't actually cause any change in levels of poverty or inclusion or tackles the climate emergency. And when you look at the figures of GDP against poverty, there's there isn't a clear relationship. So we've got to focus on purpose. What is it we want our economy to achieve? And that's about creating better lives for people and thinking about how we use the economy to deliver that, rather than always focusing on this sort of invisible end of economic growth, which actually doesn't apply in many contexts anyway.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much. A very difficult topic in just a minute, but I think it goes back to that core about that different way of doing things. a different economy, which our movement is pushing for and demonstrating as well. So thank you very much for your time this morning, Sarah. We're going to move on, and I guess here's some of those examples going forward about what people are doing in the cooperative movement. So I'm now going to introduce Glenys Thornton, Baroness Thornton, who's going to host that session, looking at some of these ideas and some of the co-ops that are involved in this work. Many of you will know Glenys, a strong advocate for co-ops, a great friend of the movement, Labour and cooperative frontbencher in the Lords, where she is shadow spokesman for health, but she's also patron of Social Enterprise UK and chair of the Co-op Innovation Foundation. Great to see you this morning, Glenys. Thank you for joining us, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Emma. And it's really a pleasure to be doing this session. I caught quite some of the contributions yesterday, and I think that this theme of building community power is absolutely wonderful. I think it's exactly right for the co-op. And I was very pleased to catch Sarah's presentation, because I was actually one of the founding board members of CLES many, many years ago, because I'm quite ancient, really. And CLES, of course, is an important partner for organisations like ours. Of course it is. And building community power is absolutely vital to get it through the next period, it seems to me. And I say that partly as a long life co-op member, joined the Bradford Co-op when I was 16 years old, and also as the founding chair of Social Enterprise UK, and also the fact that I work for the Young Foundation in places that were hit by some of the worst economic disasters that have befallen our industrial communities in the UK. And the thing that those things have taught me is that building resilience and building community power is vital, but also that the leaders of those communities are in those communities. They are there, and our job is to help them and support them. And so in a way, that's exactly what this morning's session is about. And so I'm going to introduce Shiri Shalmi, the organizer of Cooperation Town, which is a network of community-based food cooperatives providing food and affordable food. It kind of feels like we're going back to our roots, Shiri. So over to you.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction. And yes, very much, I suppose, going back to the roots, organizing around food. And also kind of really useful introduction in terms of speaking about building power. And especially for us, it's important to say building power from below. So not in the ways that power has been taken so systematically and so cruelly from our communities, because that's where it should be. So yeah, like you said, Cooperation Town is a new wish. It's about 2 years old network of community-led food co-ops. So they are small buyers groups that are based in communities up and down the country. There are currently 9 Cooperation Town food co-ops in London. There are 2 in Lincolnshire, and we are speaking to new groups and community organisers and councils and members of our community up and down the country all the time. There are currently 9 more Cooperation Town co-ops in development, from Preston to Islington to Plymouth and all over the country. A quick introduction to what is a Cooperation Town food co-op. They are, like I said, small buyers groups, so there will be 20 households coming together to buy food together and other household products. They are, at the moment, members are about 600 to 700 people who are on a weekly basis saving about 40% on their food and grocery shopping. So this is obviously a significant saving for people who live in poverty, because they are stuck in that gap between poverty wages and rent. Which is kind of, again, an introduction to kind of explain why we're doing this. So Cooperation Town is about food, and I will explain where the food comes from. But really, it is about community organizing. It's about creating power from below in our communities, in the people that maybe lots of political parties or maybe the trade unions or other sort of the bigger organizations considered to be the unorganizable. There are neighbors, there are mums, and there are elderly people, and there are disabled people, there are people of color who don't necessarily consider themselves organizers, who might not be part of any political party or trade union, and who just need access to affordable food. And we realize that this is a very good place to start organizing in our communities around the things that are easy, that are accessible, that everyone understands. We produced a pack, which I'm going to show you, and it lives on cooperation.town, which is our website. And this is basically a list of suggestions on how to start a food co-op, meaning that anyone can start a food co-op. You don't need to be an experienced organizer. You don't have to have done stuff in your neighborhood or in the TRA or in the school. You can just come together with your neighbors and start organizing. And that means that people are moving away from being recipients of charity. We've obviously seen a lot of that during COVID. But people who would have otherwise used food banks or lived in the kind of poverty that people are ashamed to be living in, and turning into community organizers, and developing the skill and the confidence to start organizing initially around food. But we know we've already got examples that people who have been organizing in the food co-op start organizing in their community around other things like housing, like education. We've had groups organizing eviction resistance with their members, again, people who would not otherwise be politicized in the sort of traditional structures. We are doing this, or we are supporting groups to do that through suggesting, advising, giving support around how to come together, how to organize, and where to find the food. So again, they are buying groups. So there are people who pull together the resources. Very low amounts of money are invested every week in the co-ops, between £3, £10 a week. And again, that amounts to reducing 40% of household costs. So alongside this kind of bulk buying, the traditional way, people also tap into, or sort of groups also tap into the surplus food that is in circulation, that you can obviously only access if you organize collectively. Individuals can't do that, same as bulk buy. So these are the combination of resources, meaning that we also look at tackling waste and kind of thinking together about the supply chain, why there is so much surplus, and educating ourselves and our members around that process as well. We are doing that through organizers. So we train organizers in London. We're now looking to train an organizer outside of London. And we do that through working with local authorities, with supportive councillors, officers, hopefully maybe MPs from our movement and across the spectrum, I suppose, on the left. We are very honest about this being a political project. You know, it's food as a way to learn to organize with our members, with our neighbors, and increasing the capacity of working class power in our neighborhoods. There is obviously a call to action. We need our movement to support us in doing this. We need the cooperative movement. We need a working class movement to help us do this. We need resources. We need to train organizers. Members need spaces in their neighborhoods, in their towns and cities where they're organized. So anyone who is listening to me now, if you work in your community as a councillor or as a community organizer, get in touch and we will help train a local organizer funded by the council, funded by us, to support the community to organize.
Thank you, Shiri. Thank you very much. And I just love the bit about how actually you're being as subversive as the Rochdale pioneers were all those, 200 years ago, and quite right. And I hope that the MPs and councillors who are on this Zoom will pay attention to your call for support, and all the very best. So thank you very much. And we're moving on now to Joanne Elston, Swap Shop Coordinator, Zero Waste Hub at Shrub Co-op, which is based in Edinburgh and is working towards a world without waste. to empower their community to live a low carbon life. So Joe, welcome to it's not a Zoom, is it? I don't know quite what it is. It's our StreamYard, and over to you.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much for having me today. So yeah, like you said, my name is Joe. I'm the swap shop coordinator for the Shrub Co-op. So I mostly work on the kind of circular textiles work that we're doing. But I thought there's probably quite a lot of people here today who don't know anything about us. So we're an Edinburgh-based cooperative that started originally about 8 years ago as a student organisation. So there were some members of the student housing co-op, so it's always been kind of quite rooted in the community and cooperative movement. And they realised that every year students would be moving into halls, they would buy toasters, kettles, microwaves, whatever. And then at the end of the university year, they would throw all of them away. And then the next year, if students would come, they would buy all the same things. At the end of the year, they would throw them away. And they were recognising how wasteful that was. So they started doing community collections, which we're still running today. So they go to the universities, they would collect all of the stuff, they would store it over the holidays and give it out for free at the beginning of the next university year. So ever since the beginning, it was always a very much a zero waste organisation. So yeah, all of that we are still doing today. And since then, we've started doing a lot more things. So we had a swap shop that got set up. People thought, why are we only doing this once a year? Why not do it a lot more? So that started, some people got interested in food waste and realising how much food supermarkets were throwing away at the end of the day, and thinking, why don't we go and collect that and give it away to people who need it? There's a We Spoke Hub, which is our bike workshop. So not only for repairs, but for going and being empowered to learn how to fix your own bike, to encourage people towards active travel, and various other shorter projects, kind of research projects that people were doing. So one into textiles, some into food, some into cooperative movements and how to organise and that kind of thing. And so it's very much always been the ethos that as long as things fit in with what we're doing and we have the capacity to do them, we will kind of branch out into different areas. And it's all around self-starting as one of the cooperative principles. As we got some funding, we started having more staff members and having more capacity to set up more of these projects and to take them from volunteer-run things into much bigger permanent projects. So currently we're doing all the things that I previously mentioned. We also have a cafe that runs using as much food as possible from the food sharing network, and provides a space for people to come in and have affordable fooding, and just give us that sense of community in the space. We're also working on creating some kind of replicable guides on the things that we're doing, so the community collections and setting up swap shops, and direct clothes swaps and all of these different kinds of things to give out to other people for free, so that they can set up similar things in their own areas. So we're mostly a volunteer-run cooperative, and as I mentioned, a lot of what we do is encouraging the volunteers to take ownership of the cooperative and to see the gaps that the staff members have missed and the things that we could be doing that we hadn't thought of. So for example, recently we've had some volunteers set up film screenings for people to watch films that might be quite hard to watch alone around environmental issues, and to do it together. And we've had some volunteers set up direct clothes swaps again, because they recognise that as well as the shop that we run where you have to pay for things, it's really good for people who can't afford to do that to be able to just directly swap things. And we also, really use the community as a space for people to come together to talk about environmental issues and to realise that they're not alone, because we recognise that often it can be quite lonely and isolating trying to work on zero waste things, on environmental issues, and feeling like it is just you kind of battling against the machine of capitalism. So that's one of the main things that our community is there for, to bring all of these people together, for them to share ideas and to realise that they are doing this as part of a much, much wider movement. So unfortunately with COVID-19, a lot of our things had to stop, but we really realised the importance of having a physical space for people to come into, and we tried to make sure that we were open as much as possible for that. And it also allowed us to kind of reimagine the food sharing project. So until then, it had mostly been students who were accessing it who maybe didn't have the most money, but were mostly doing it as kind of a zero waste thing. But we got involved with a lot of other organisations who were battling the food poverty that was happening during COVID-19. And it's actually allowed the Food Sharing Hub to become a much, much bigger thing. We're supporting a lot more people. We're getting a lot more food in by working with other organisations. And it's allowing us to kind of access a different community of people that we were previously working with, which has been really amazing. Obviously, COVID also had a huge impact on our revenue, and we are still really struggling, as the funding that we're finding is mostly very small bits of money rather than the really big pots that we need. And a lot of the funding is around kind of technological advancement or renewable things. But we think that actually making sure that money is going towards building community around these things is really, really important, because that will help us to create long-lasting change and to actually change the kind of way that we view all this stuff in society. So that is our big shout out. If anyone watching today can help us get any money, that would be really, really appreciated.
Thank you very much indeed, Jo. And it just shows that from one small, actually really very, very good idea, which is about domestic appliances and students, many things can grow. And that is very encouraging. And I listened to that very good small idea, and I'm definitely going to get in touch with my local university up in Bradford and see whether they're doing something along the same lines, because they must be facing exactly the same issue. And I'd be really grateful if you could make sure that you upload some of your propaganda and ideas, because I was most impressed by that. Moving along, we have Anna Keir, who is the Chief Executive of Tonic Housing. It's a community-led, not-for-profit organisation creating inclusive urban LGBT and affirming LGBT plus affirming retirement communities. So over to you, Anna.
Thank you, Glenys. Yeah, as you just mentioned, Tonic's a community-led, not-for-profit housing association. We were established in 2014 by our founder board members from their personal lived experience to really look at addressing the issues of loneliness and isolation faced by older LGBT people. And in particular, the need for LGBT affirming housing with care, as there was none in the UK. So they actually set about to change this. This lack of choice has meant that actually many older LGBT people felt they had to go back into the closet in order to get the support that they need in later life, or actually go without if they want to be authentic selves. Older LGBT people don't usually have their biological family to support them or help with navigating the care system, as LGBT people were not allowed to have children historically, and many were actually ostracised from their families when they came out. So they moved to the cities to find community. And this is where people actually have established families of choice from our community, but we find that these are rarely recognised in mainstream service providers. So just to give you some sort of insight to this, last year we undertook a community-led research project with our fellow LGBT organisations, Stonewall Housing and Opening Doors London, specifically to look at what older LGBT Londoners said they want from their housing and care. And when we asked them about where they want to live and retirement housing, 56% of people wanted LGBT-specific provision. A further 23% wanted LGBT accredited provision. But I think most stark is that only 1% said that they wanted a general retirement scheme. And we've actually produced a report, our Building Safer Choices 2020 report, and that sets out our asks from public bodies to actually respond to these demands. So back to Tonic. Tonic's mission is to actually meet that demand from our community in some way by actually creating vibrant and inclusive urban LGBT affirming retirement communities where people can share common experiences, find mutual support and enjoy their later life. Essentially, it's about turning a negative into a positive. So we are the Tonic, enabling LGBT people to live our lives out. And just to explain really about what LGBT affirming means. It's actually an inclusive phrase. So Tonic is also for those that don't identify as LGBT plus, but actually value, respect and celebrate our community. So rather than just being LGBT friendly, this is a much more proactive, actively affirming of the lives, histories, needs and desires of LGBT people. We have a small staff team, just 4 of us. We have a board, as I mentioned earlier, of people with lived experience, but we also have a really proactive community panel themselves that have lived experience, and they really shape Tonic and they report into our board. So I'm really proud that just a few weeks ago, we celebrated the launch of Tonic at Bank House. This is actually the UK's first LGBT retirement community, with partners and supporters, and actually some of our first residents there with us. Bank House is a beautiful retirement extra care scheme in Vauxhall. It's fully wheelchair accessible with fantastic community spaces. And those community spaces were really, really important to us, because having actually a safe space to be with other people that are part of your community, where you can share stories openly without fear, and actually have some fun together. And it's been a really long journey to get to this point. The barriers were significant, not least because of the capital cost of the extra care scheme and the difficulty raising millions of pounds in finance when you have no assets or track record. So to get past this, we took a pragmatic partnership approach of working with a much larger housing association, in this case, One Housing, to achieve our goal. But in doing that, we were really clear that to be successful, we had to have our long-term community-led values built into that partnership, and the Housing Association had to really respect that. So why is our partnership different? Well, Tonic actually purchased the 125 leases of 19 empty apartments in this scheme, and we're selling these on a shared ownership basis to a maximum of 75%, and Tonic retained 25%, and we don't charge any rent on that. And for us, that means that we now have a community asset. It gives security to our residents that we are there for the long term. It wasn't an easy model to put together. It took over 2 years to actually secure the £5.7 million in loan funding. It's loan, not grant, from the Mayor's Community Housing Fund. And we did this throughout all of the lockdowns. We're now actually applying to become a registered provider of social housing, as we now have that asset. And that means that we hope in future we'll be able to provide rented housing as well. We also gained some Community Housing Fund revenue to appoint a community manager. And we did that well over a year ago, because we recognised how important it was to engage with all the diverse LGBT groups across London and gain their grassroots inputs and support to our work. And Danny, our community manager, is now actually based at Bank House. He's leading on our shared ownership sales. We don't have any sales people. You meet the real people when you meet us. We build relationships with people, and we're also involved in facilitating events and activities with current residents at Bank House, and alongside working with our future residents who are looking to some examples that they've given us is they want to set up a history club to preserve some of our community stories, others keen to set up a gardening club. And we're really in this interesting phase now of moving from just a community-led organisation to actually one that is community-led and resident-led in the next stage of our journey. And what we're really interested is actually evidencing and showing what the value of this mutual support is. And it's a learning process for all of us. We know there's a demand for other tenures and actually other locations, not necessarily just in London. It could be other places in London, but also other beacon cities. And we're keen to work with local LGBT groups, housing partners, and social investors to make this happen. And we hope that it's going to be easier now that we've forged the path with Tonic at Bank House. So just to conclude on how we're actually building our community power in other ways as well. So we work collaboratively with fellow LGBT organisations. And earlier this year, we published a manifesto for London LGBTQIA+ community housing. And we would really love your support in actually driving that agenda forward. Thank you.
Anna, thank you so much. That was really inspiring, and just the journey that you've been on shows that you have both got patience and resilience, and it's and go for pragmatic solutions, which then can take you on to the next stage. So all I can say now is thank you and all the very best and good luck for the next phase that you're entering.
Thank you.
We're now moving on to Sarah. I'm so delighted to welcome Sarah McCarthy-Fry, who I haven't seen for quite some time, but it's lovely to see you again, Sarah. A very committed co-operator. We were colleagues in Parliament. Unfortunately, Sarah departed, but we're colleagues and friends. And so I am fascinated to hear what you've been doing next with your life, Sarah. So welcome and over to you.
Oh, thank you, Glynis. It's lovely to see you too. Well, I'm now a member-nominated director with Co-op Group, and I was elected to the board in 2019. And one of the first items on the agenda when I joined was formulating our vision for Co-op Group, which is cooperating for a fairer world. And we've got 3 pillars to that vision: fairer to our colleagues who work for us, fairer to our planet, and fairer to our members and our communities. And of course, that ties in with the 7th cooperative principle, concern for our communities. For those who don't know, Co-op Group is nationwide with a presence across the UK. We have 2,600 food stores and 840 funeral homes. So we are at the heart of our local communities. And this gives us a visible presence, which allows us to tailor our community activities to local needs. Now, our community action plans are far more than just ticking the corporate social responsibility box, and our support to the community goes beyond giving out community grants, although of course we do that as well. When our members buy selected Co-op branded products and services, they get 2p for every £1 back to spend for themselves, but there's another 2p for every £1 they spent, which is spent on supporting communities. We have our local community fund, and this helps thousands of grassroots community causes, and our members select which cause in their local community to support. Now, since we launched the fund back in 2016, we've shared over £70 million, and that's delivered 21,000 unique community projects across the UK. Our fund received the Better Society Award for national commitment to communities. And in 2020, we supported 4,500 local causes across the UK. And I think we've had about 10,000 applications for the current round. But as well as these locally directed projects, we also have our Community Partnerships Fund. Now that helps us to focus on the big issues that we identified as being important in our communities, and where we can have the biggest impact by partnering with national organisations. And in 2019, we launched our Community Plan 2022, and there's 3 areas that we focus in on: fair access to food, fair access to mental wellbeing support, and fair access to education and employment for young people. During the pandemic, like everybody, we've been supporting food banks through FareShare and other organisations. But we recognise that food banks are a crisis solution. We all want to be in the position that food banks are no longer required, but I think we all know that isn't going to happen anytime soon, particularly with the cut in universal credit, rising energy and food prices. However, we want to enhance our food access support, and we have a new partnership with Hubbub to expand a network of community fridges which are open to everyone. And they provide a place where local residents can share and access the surplus food donated by local food businesses. But this isn't just about providing food. These community fridges also provide budgeting and healthy cooking advice, well-being and family support, as well as digital inclusion training, and that empowers people to develop knowledge and help themselves. We have big ambitions for mental wellbeing support. We have been partnering with major organisations like Mind, and we're now looking at ways we can help support additional mental health issues that have arisen from the pandemic, and in particular, bereavement support. We know through our funeral business in 2020 that 47% of bereaved adults in the UK have been denied the farewell they would have wanted for their loved ones because of the COVID restrictions. And in support of young people, we've partnered with the Damilola Trust and other organisations. But we want to develop this work further, and we want to look for new youth partners to work with us in developing projects. Now, alongside all this, of course, we also have our own co-op academies. We've currently got 28 of them, and they provide high quality education rooted in co-op values in some of the most deprived areas in the north of England. And during the pandemic, we ensured that our most vulnerable students had access to the technology to be able to learn. And we also made sure our families that were eligible for free school meals had enhanced support, both in term time and in the holidays, particularly when the government were saying they weren't going to support that, although they did in the end, being forced into it. We also have our ambitious co-op apprenticeship programme, which gives opportunities to young people to learn new skills and gain qualifications on the job. Underpinning all our community work is our network of member pioneers and our digital platform. Our member pioneers are our boots on the ground. We have around 1,000 member pioneers and member pioneer coordinators, and they're based in communities across the UK. In 2020, 90,000 hours were invested in local communities, of which 30,000 supported our community coronavirus response. And on average, our member pioneers engage with 30,000 people every month. And we also have Co-operate, and that's our online platform that pulls together local community groups. It's a one-stop shop so people can access through their smartphones and tablets. We're building that digital network, and it's growing by the day. There were around 12,000 groups in September. And we encourage all the community organisations who apply to our local community fund to sign up to Co-operate. Our aim is for all the community organisations to cooperate together, sharing ideas and best practice. And this is just a flavour of what we're doing. Of course, there's always more to do. As Co-op Party members, if you're not a member of Co-op Group, join us. If you are, all of you, contact your local member pioneer. You can find contact details on the website. Get involved in local projects and spread the word about cooperation.
Sarah, thank you so much. And you kind of reaffirm, I think, for everybody, why we're here. Why are we co-op members? Why are we activists? And what's really lovely is that this is the sort of next generation of cooperative activism and community activism. And that is so inspiring. And it's so lovely to see you. And maybe one day we might meet each other in the flesh, as it were, so to speak. Ooh. On that note, I will move on to Katie Oglethorpe, who is Director of Communications New Local, which is an independent think tank with a mission to unlock community power, strengthen public services and help renew local government. And I think, Katie, you've got a presentation for us. I think that's right.
I have,
yes?
yeah, which I think is
great. Well, over to you.
Great. Is my screen sharing yet, or we might have to wait a bit? But in the meantime, I'll introduce myself. My name's Katie Oglethorpe. As you can see, I'm Director of Communications at New Local, and I'm here to talk about our understanding of community power, which we see as totally aligned with the principles, spirit and values of the cooperative movement. So we were very excited to see that the title of the conference this year, Building Community Power, and we thought this seems completely fitting for the work we're doing. So we are a think tank, and we're also a local government network, and all of our work now is aligned towards this mission of unlocking community power. So we've got about 60 councils who are members of our network, all across the UK, all different types of councils, different political alliances. But what unites them is this wish really to do things differently. The belief that it's only through really sharing power with residents and having residents cooperating with residents in running public services and improving their places that really we can transform public services and the places in which these councils operate. So for us, community power means handing over responsibility, power and resources to communities. And it's this fundamental shift towards recognizing that the solutions to an area's biggest problems, and actually we'd argue the country's biggest problems, are not to be found just inside institutions, but outside in the communities. And I think COVID-19 has really demonstrated some of this for us. So community power is exemplified by people like Mark Pepper, who hopefully you can see now if my screen sharing is working. So Mark Pepper is one of a group of residents in an area called Lawrence Weston on the outskirts of Bristol, an area that would be defined as deprived or left behind. What Mark did was gather together with all of his other local residents really in 2012 and think, well, we've got to find a collective solution to some of the challenges this area is facing. So they began with a canvas across the whole community saying, what are your biggest problems? What would you like to see change? And they started with the main answer really, which is we want a low-cost supermarket. We want access to affordable food. And they managed to put pressure on the council and become involved in a bid for unoccupied land, and managed to basically engineer a local supermarket coming to their area. Since then, they've gone from strength to strength. They've taken over the health centre, built a new youth centre, and are now part of a massive bid to build wind turbines on council-owned lands, which will not only provide clean energy to their community, but will also deliver profits back into transforming that community. It's also people like Dr. Jawida Edu. So Dr. Edu is the GP in Stockport. She was facing an issue familiar to loads of GPs now, which is just too many patients and not enough time, basically. So she also noticed that about 1 in 5 patients who came to her weren't suffering from anything that could be treated at all. They were lonely. They didn't know how to cope with life. So she brought together a group of patient volunteers and asked them what they would do to help solve this. What's come out of this is a huge number of social groups, activities for around all sorts of interests, really, which aren't explicitly aimed to make people healthier, but have that effect. And now what's happened is that Dr. Edu, for example, runs consultations in community allotments with the gardening club while people are talking about healthy eating. She's seen the people seeking appointments at her surgery drop, which means she can also spend more time with people with actual medical needs, whereas people who are lonely can join in with community activities. There's people like Donna Hall, who was originally slated to speak today. She's our chair, and for anybody not familiar with the Wigan Deal, it's an amazing, innovative scheme by a council to really share power with residents. And the Wigan Deal also involves businesses, the NHS, the police force, all joining together to join in a new way of working with people that's an asset-based working, focusing on strengths. And that involved giving 11 million to community groups. It resulted in savings of 115 million for the council. And what's probably more important is that the poorest wards in the area saw life expectancy rise at the time when life expectancy is actually falling for our poorest people. So at New Local, we really want to take these amazing examples and, amazing examples like we've heard elsewhere in the conference, and really produce a sort of coherent evidence base for why community power does make a difference. We see it, we feel it, we sort of know it, but to have that wider impact, we knew that we needed to come up with real tangible examples of evidence. And it's these main points that we've come up with, having taken every piece of analysis from community power that we can find and really looking at what the joint advantages are. And we want to use this to encourage our network and other local authorities and public sector and the NHS to start thinking differently about how they really collaborate with their communities. We also want to take this message to national government. We want to break into this dichotomy that exists between either the state can solve all our problems or the markets can solve all our problems. Both of these have shown to not really be able to live up to the main problems that we face today and which are going to grow and grow. And there is a third way, and it's it's just as meaningful and it's just as influential, which is community power. So this is a street party in Union Street in Plymouth, one of the sort of poorest parts of Plymouth, where local residents joined together, started putting on street parties, and have gone on to take over ownership of 3 major neglected empty buildings. And they're really, really showing how community power can transform an area and even a city. So I'll stop there, but here are some links and our social in case you do want to follow us. It'd be lovely and amazing to have you all part of this movement as it grows. And yeah, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Katie, very much indeed. And I'm already following you on Twitter. I think I just did.
Yes,
it.
I saw. Yeah,
and I hope everybody else will all do the same. This is my granddaughter. I now need to and the place where I used to work, the Young Foundation, which I ran. This is in a way what I said in the opening of this session, is that all communities have within them their own power and their own leadership. And you are doing exactly the right thing, which is you are making that visible and effective. And we can't say more than that. So thank you very much indeed. Now over to Nick, who everybody knows Nick Croft. Of course they do. It's great to have you here, Nick. And actually, it's a really great way to end this session is your contribution, because we've just had a series of brilliant stories and narratives of where community and building community power is working. So over to you, Nick.
Well, thank you, Glenys. Delighted to be here. You will see that I am on brand with the Democratic Ownership Vintage poster over my shoulder. Kind of you to say that everybody knows me, but I'm sure that's not true. I'm Nick Crofts. I'm the new Chief Executive at the Co-op Foundation. We are the Co-op Group's charity. We are a grant maker, and this year we're providing £5 million of funding supporting other charities and organisations in their work to build a more cooperative world and to empower people. And the foundation exists to inspire people to work together to tackle inequality and make things better in communities. It's perfectly aligned to our co-op vision that we heard from Sarah earlier, cooperating for a fairer world. And we help communities to maximise their opportunities by putting our values into practice, to stimulate and strengthen community action that connects and empowers people so that they can work together to make things better. This is cooperation in action. And cooperation, of course, is about people, but values by themselves are inadequate to the task. Resources are needed, and that's where the foundation comes in. We build supportive relationships with organisations that can make a cooperative difference for people. And our last 18 months have been, just like everybody else's, completely overtaken by COVID. But with great agility, the foundation pivoted to protecting our partners from the pandemic, moving quickly to get funding to where it was needed most. So what is it that we do with this money that we have? Well, we make grants to charities and to other ethical organisations to help them to do more and to make a bigger difference in their communities. And alongside our work to tackle inequality, we have a very big focus on working with young people. And in fact, we are the largest funder of youth loneliness initiatives in the UK. And of course, that has never been more relevant. There is a tidal wave of poor mental health caused by lockdown, and poor mental health may itself well be the next pandemic. We've developed real expertise on youth loneliness, and we share that expertise with partners to tackle the impact on young people. And we've already invested real money. In recent years, we've given £8.7 million to 288 youth projects, changing the lives of nearly 27,000 young people. And alongside tackling loneliness, strengthening communities has always been a big priority for us. We invest in local community spaces that bring people together. helping community organisations to grow their incomes. And to do this, we've delivered a social investment programme with £2.5 million worth of interest-free loans and grants to support community organisations, making sure that they are sustainable for the long term. We also help charities and social enterprises to use technology to better serve their communities in new ways. And we try and be innovative, not just in our grant making. We are very good at drawing in match funding from partners, really leveraging and making our funds go further. We partner with the National Lottery and Department for Culture, Media and Sport, giving £1.6 million to 57 community organisations. And we partner with an organisation called I Will, providing life-changing opportunities for young people to get involved in social action. And alongside all of that, we fund hundreds of thousands of pounds every year to support community-led environmental projects, a very big priority for us. And we're just about to launch a new carbon innovation fund, helping organisations to bring to fruition the new tech needed to tackle climate change. And it's not just grant making that we do, we are campaigners as well. We are determined to try and change the broken system, such as our Lonely Not Alone campaign. Research showed us that young people are lonely more often than any other age group, but it just isn't talked about because there is a stigma. So to tackle that stigma, we run the Lonely Not Alone campaign. It was developed by young people themselves. The collateral that they constructed reached 7 million people on social media, and our young co-designers were all over TV talking about the campaign. And even Boris Johnson, there's a name I imagine that's not been mentioned today, even Boris Johnson supported us on social media by joining our call to action to wear yellow socks. It's a campaign that's had real cut through, and this year it's to be even bigger. Young people have again built the campaign and have led the creative development. It's to launch next week to show that we can all take one small step to support somebody experiencing loneliness. So do keep your eyes peeled. We are super excited. It's a brilliant exemplar of the foundation making change happen in a campaigning role, and it's one that I'm very interested to explore further. We very recently announced a £250,000 grant partnership with an organisation called Refugee Action, a national organisation with terrific local reach. It has 150 local organisations in its delivery network, with a very cooperative approach to its work, both to care for the immediate needs of refugees, but also critically campaigning to transform the broken asylum system for future arrivals. And we've been looking again at our strategy, how we can more deeply embed our co-op ways of working and our ethos into grant making. And in fact, Glenys, only last week we had that rarest of events, a face-to-face strategy day, and there were some really rich ideas that we can bring forward. And I'm looking forward very much to being able to come back next year to launch our refreshed plans early in the new year, I think. So I must thank our co-op group's members for supplying a very significant portion of the funding that we receive through our membership scheme, the Community Partnership Fund that Sarah mentioned a little while ago. And I must also thank Alan Layton, who in all of his years as chair of the co-op group board has donated £250,000 per year to the foundation, more than £1 million now. Without the generosity of our members, and indeed Alan, we wouldn't be able to do our work to help build community power, to help build resilience, and to lubricate the wheels of the more cooperative world. So Glenys, with that, thank you. I will hand back to you.
Nick, thank you very much indeed. And I thought that was an absolutely perfect ending to what I think's been an inspiring and very useful session. I mean, ever the co-op, people applying themselves and leading practical solutions to problems. And I think that the work that you're doing is absolutely vital, because it's about strategic coordination, capturing innovation, and giving co-op innovation the support it needs to get to the next stage. So notwithstanding Boris Johnson and his yellow socks, and it'd be amazing if he could ever find a matching pair of anything, I think that is absolutely vital. And so ending this session, I just want to say thank you to all the contributors, and how inspiring. I always come away from these sort of sessions much richer in my knowledge of what's gone on and what's going on in the world. And I think that for those of us who are working in Parliament, it's very important, because it helps us to do our jobs better and to know where to point ourselves and what direction we should be going in and what to support as time moves on. So I'm now going to hand back to Emma and say thank you for the privilege of chairing this session, and good luck with the rest of the day.
Thank you very much, Glenys, and thank you to the grandchildren as well for making an appearance. It's nice to see them. Yeah, that was a really inspiring session, an awful lot going on. If you want to get in touch with us to find out more about any of those or join the party and get more involved, then please do. We're now moving on to our final speaker of the morning, who doesn't need much introduction. I'm really pleased that we have Anas Sarwar, Labour and Co-operative MSP and leader of Scottish Labour Party, with us today. So without further ado, over to you, Anas.
Thank you very much, Emma, and can also say a huge thank you and hi to Glenys as well, and to everyone that's watching. Can I also start with an apology? The sun, as you know, always shines in Glasgow, but it's particularly shining through this window today, so I apologise if that's causing a bit of a glare in the background. Friends, it's an absolute honour to address you for the first time as leader of the Scottish Labour Party, and as a first-time but re-elected Labour and Co-operative MSP. And the group I lead is the biggest Scottish cooperative party group of MSPs ever, 11 powerful voices for our values in the Scottish Parliament. I also want to take a moment to pay tribute to former co-op MSPs who have left the Scottish Parliament in the last year, but who have been giants of our movement. In particular, Joanne Lamont, who I was honoured to be deputy leader for 3 years, Dave Stewart, Claudia Beamish, and of course now our new General Secretary, James Kelly. But it's also important the conference marks the passing of a great cooperator who is not with us today. Many people don't know this, but I actually joined the co-op because of Ian Miller. Ian Miller, Mr. Scotland, who sadly passed away last November. He served our party on the Co-op National Party Executive and on Scottish Labour's Executive for more years than I can remember. And he is a valued friend and colleague that is missed every single day. Conference, throughout my time in politics, the values of the Cooperative Party have been central not just to my beliefs, but to how and why I'm trying to change our country. This movement, once which has walked arm in arm with our working people, has been at the forefront of the fight, not just to build a fairer society, but to build a better society. You all know that politics is about communities being served and that no community thrives on division. And when, to be honest, many in your sister party forget ourselves and let our anger at injustice boil over into language of dislike and difference, it is good to be reminded that the better nation we want to build begins on the bedrock of our common interest. That the heights of the fairer, progressive country we all want will be reached through the politics, which is about all of us working together. Because the key thing I think for us to learn is, in this time of politics of anger, we have to demonstrate the politics of empathy. And in this time of politics of division, we have to deliver the politics of unity. And in a time of politics of despair, we have got to advocate the politics of hope. And never more important than coming through the shadow of a pandemic that has changed our world forever. Now, it's only natural that when we think about how our society has been reshaped, we think first of the tragedies, then of the challenges, and finally, when we dare, of the hope to come. And as politicians, it is right that we keep our focus on those who've had their lives upended and on getting them the support and help they need right now. But we should also take a moment to recognise that in the darkest of the moments of the last 18 months, we have seen the best of our values, cooperative values, in action. When crisis hit and our society faced what was until then unimaginable challenges, it was the values of community and cooperation that helped save so many lives. Volunteers, businesses and campaigners pulled together to support neighbours. From inviting a potentially lonely acquaintance to a Zoom pub quiz, to making sure your downstairs neighbour had milk for their tea, we saw millions across this country make the rhetoric of cooperation, community and solidarity real. And this isn't just about abstracts. Early research also shows that cooperatives weathered the economic storm of the pandemic well, and that they protected jobs and supported livelihoods better than other businesses. I should also pay tribute to my colleague Daniel Johnson MSP, who helped lead the Protection of Retail Workers Bill through the Parliament during that pandemic. I know that was a bill that was supported not just by the Labour Party, but the Cooperative Party and also our affiliated trade unions. A real demonstration of the difference cooperatives make in our economy and why my party will champion them playing an even bigger role in Scotland's recovery is that message of what came through the pandemic. Because part of making this a national recovery that works for everyone is also, I think, making it a cooperative recovery too. And as leader of the Scottish Labour Party, I hope to work with Scotland's cooperative movement to put you at the heart of everything Holyrood does. That's why we are advocating doubling the size of the cooperative sector in Scotland, putting it on a par with those in leading economies like Germany and the US. I want us to build on changes that saw Glasgow and Edinburgh councils become cooperative councils, and we will push power down and out of Holyrood into council chambers so we can have local authorities across the country being cooperative councils, so we can empower communities and workplaces, not just council chambers and parliaments. Because Scotland's constitutional row for far too long has focused on the division and game playing between Edinburgh and Westminster, I think the answer to that is pushing power back to where it matters in our communities. And there we can work together to build a better Scotland and heal some of the toxic nature of our politics. Because the way I view this is, we often hear a lot about political opponents and enemies, but our enemies are not in politics. Our enemies are not those that disagree with us on the Constitution. Our enemies aren't in political chambers. Our enemy has to be poverty. Our opponent has to be prejudice. And our thing that we want to defeat must be poverty that blights too many lives and stalks too many communities. And cooperatives have the answer to so many of those problems. Let's look at the models of the pioneering Harlow Hydro, of the Edinburgh Solar Co-op and the Edinburgh Student Housing Co-op. If you look at them, you can see the ideas that can transform lives across the country. Because all Scots should have a right to a warm, safe, affordable home. With so much more to be done to tackle Scotland's housing crisis, we must take the opportunity to embed collective ownership as new homes are built. And that's why I want the Scottish Parliament to set targets to increase the number of housing cooperatives and facilitate their creation as we build more homes. I want us to set up a local mortgage system to strengthen and complement the work of credit unions, and to encourage new models of ownership in the housing sector to share the proceeds of our investment in housing. It's when we work together we can also rebuild our town centres. I know a particular focus of this conference has been looking at how we support the High Street fight back. The High Streets are the heart of our communities and an emblem of our civic pride. But after years of being ruthlessly undercut by internet giants, out-of-town shopping centres and the trials of the pandemic, they need our support now more than ever. Our high streets were already crumbling pre-pandemic, but their decline has been accelerated by the pandemic as people's cultures have changed. And that means having a plan to bring shoppers back to our high streets, but also giving communities a sense of ownership over their shared space. And that means a high street bailout plan with reduced business rates on non-grocery bricks and mortar shops. But it also means getting companies like Amazon and other online giants to actually pay their taxes, so we can pay their share of the contribution to local services and redistribute that money to high streets across the country. But it also means making it easier for local communities to act themselves. And that's why the Scottish Government must look at the work in North Ayrshire, for example, on the High Street in Stevenson, and a project I visited just recently in Dumfries, the Mid-Steeple Quarter, and make sure schemes like that are getting the support they need to succeed. For conference, when it comes to cooperative politics, the SNP aren't our friends or progressive allies. And that was made starkly clear this week with the disgraceful treatment of my colleague Rory Grant's Right to Food Bill. Many of us take the availability of food for granted, but the truth is so many people are living in food poverty in Scotland, even now in 2021. The Scottish Government has consistently failed to put ending food poverty as a priority or bring forward the strong food policy this country not only needs, but deserves. No one in our country, no one should be going hungry in a wealthy nation. And by enshrining the internationally recognised right to food in Scots law, we can send a clear message that hunger has no place in a modern Scotland. The pandemic has made the right to food bill even more urgent. But despite this week the Scottish Greens and the SNP teamed up to kick it into the long grass. To delay on this vital matter sends a message to the public that this government is not interested in tackling food poverty. We don't have the luxury of time. We can't dither and delay. The SNP and Greens need to drop their partisan opposition and put the needs of the people of Scotland above petty politics. That's why the Scottish Labour Party stands fully behind Rhoda Grant and the Co-operative Party in delivering this bill. Now, with all eyes on Scotland ahead of COP26, it has never been more important to meet our obligations to the world too. And that means transforming our energy infrastructure to reduce emissions and jumpstart a jobs-first transition. We hear a lot about a just transition. There is no just transition that sacrifices tens of thousands of jobs and sacrifices whole communities. And that's why we are demanding a jobs-first transition. But that also means changing how we distribute the economic power that goes hand in hand with energy. At Labour conference in Brighton, I announced an Energy Transition Commission led by the former Energy Minister Brian Wilson to help create a greener, fairer and more prosperous future. But that means an energy future which recognises the vital role cooperatives must have in that mix. Because an energy sector dominated by big business, controlling the whole infrastructure from generation to distribution will always be vulnerable to geopolitical and economic shocks. And that means a market where prices can spike, creating a cost of living crisis that we are now living through. Community solutions can provide an alternative that not only encourages innovation and technology in the energy sector, but also creates viable alternatives to compete on price and sustainability. And that's why my commission will explicitly look at how we support the potential of co-ops in the energy market and make it a serious part of Scotland's energy mix. And to do that, I'm happy to announce that when the commissioners are announced for our commission, a cooperator will be joining them, because cooperative solutions build resilience and equality from the ground up. And that's my final promise to you. Across our country, we are seeing widening inequality and increasing poverty. While the wealthiest get wealthier, the bonds of social solidarity which bind our communities together get weaker. Through cooperation, we can put wealth back into communities. But it's not just money. Societies that are about all of us are safer, happier, and better places to raise a family. Empowered communities that bring different groups together make fairer and better decisions. And recognising that is why we have devolution in the first place and why we must push power back out again to our communities across the country. So while the Scottish Government and the SNP slash council budgets and hoard powers at Holyrood, Labour and the Co-operative Party will work together to give communities the powers they need. So while the SNP revel in an us versus them politics in Scotland, and across the UK we have an us versus them Tory government, we have got to learn the lesson from that. The Labour Party cannot defeat us versus them politics with our own version of us versus them. We have to build a politics that is about all of us, and all of us to bring our country together, and all of us to defeat poverty, and all of us working to create a fairer future for every community on these islands. But we cannot build that alternative alone. We need this country's real progressive alliance to deliver it. That progressive alliance, that real progressive alliance, is cooperators, trade unionists, and community activists working together to build a better country, and a country that works for all of us. So together, let's build that alternative, bring our country together, and create a better future for Scotland and the United Kingdom. And the final thing I'll say before handing back to you, Emma, is I want to thank the cooperative family for the partnership and the support they have shown me and the Scottish Labour Party over the last 6 months. I recognise we have an absolute mountain to climb to give the people of this country the Labour Party they deserve, so they can have the country they deserve. And I'm absolutely determined to work in partnership with you to deliver it. This is not about managing decline. This is about rebuilding our country together. And I passionately believe if we can pull our values together, pull the Labour and cooperative family together, and reach out to communities across this country that feel left behind, that feel ignored, and feel out of touch from an out-of-touch, arrogant Scottish government and an out-of-touch, arrogant UK government, that we can get our party and our family back to where it belongs, delivering for the people of this great country, both in Scotland and across the UK. Thanks so much for having me this morning, and I look forward to taking any questions.
Thank you very much, and I'm sure there's lots of nodding and applause to the absolutely great speech. I think you've touched on some real issues affecting people's lives in terms of the housing, energy, food, really core issues that are really affecting people, not just in Scotland, but across the UK as well. And really good to hear that there will be a Co-op rep on the Energy Commission as well. I think that will make a real difference. Energy costs are absolutely spiralling at the moment, but also we need to be aware of that climate emergency as well and responding to that. We do have some questions for you, if that's okay.
Yeah, no problem.
People are keen to ask questions based on that speech. So I'll give you a selection that are coming through. I thought it was quite interesting what you said about devolution, and I think making sure that devolution doesn't just stop at Holyrood, and actually the SNP have been quite centralising and not necessarily devolve powers to towns and cities. There is a question about how we make community ownership relevant, not just to the Highlands and Islands, but also to the towns and cities in Scotland as well. There's a second question around how Labour and Co-op members can support you on that right to food bill. Absolutely disgraceful that it hasn't progressed, an absolutely fundamental right. So what can we do as members to help you in that fight? And I think I'll just pick, there's a couple actually, just asking you about how you can tackle the issues you face in opposition. There's reference to Daniel Johnson's bill, which, you know, did protect shop workers against violence. But what else can we do in opposition, and particularly in opposition to the SNP as well? How can you be effective in that? So a selection of questions. Over to you, Anna.
Thank you, Emma. A good selection of questions. I'll just take them in turn. On the first point about pushing power out to our communities, I think it's really important that we understand why devolution matters. Because a lot of time when we talk about devolution, people think we're talking about devolution as some kind of political fix to independence. But it can't be seen as some kind of political fix to independence. We have to advocate devolution because we are truly the party of devolution, and we recognise that pushing wealth, opportunity and power out from our parliaments to local communities is fundamentally who we are as a political movement. And if we are going to have a recovery that works for everyone, then we have got to make sure it's not a central belt recovery, it's not a west of Scotland recovery or an Edinburgh-centric recovery. It has to be a recovery that is urban, rural, coastal, island communities. And that means pushing out power. And a large part of that is actually economic development power. So one part is around adequately resourcing local government, absolutely crucial. But it also, I think, is pushing out capital and pushing out infrastructure and pushing out economic levers to the nations and regions within Scotland, so the regions within Scotland, so we can actually make a meaningful difference. And I'll give you a practical example of that. So a lot of people, I've mentioned the Mid-Steeple Quarter project in Dumfries. I've mentioned the work on strengthening the high streets in North Ayrshire. Let me give you a more remote example. So for our island communities. So in the Western Isles, we have a tragic situation where we have a downgrading of an airport, which means taking skilled jobs away from Stornoway and from the Western Isles. At the same time, we have the threat of downgrading the University of the Highlands and Islands, meaning less skilled training places available on the island, meaning it less attractive for people to go and work on the island, but also forcing more people away from the island and moving abroad, or moving to the mainland or moving abroad. And you also have huge renewables potential on the island, but it's not getting the investment it needs. If you've got a genuine partnership through a cooperative model, like I've actually seen on some parts of the Isle of Lewis and Harris, is if you've got a cooperative model that put real investment around our renewable industries, you back that up with the engineering training places you need at the University of the Highlands and Islands, and create that supply chain going from the university into the workplace in terms of those renewable industries on the island, That would itself attract more people to come to the island. It would mean more people stay on the island. It would mean greater economic development on the island. And it would also mean the strengthening of the airport alongside that, because you would need a well-sustained, well-managed, well-run, a highly employed, highly skilled airport alongside that to meet the needs and the aspirations of the people on the island. Of course, alongside that, an active and thriving ferry service. That's the big kind of economic development package that I don't think we have a Scottish government that understands that. What they're concentrating on is diminishing local identity to nation-state building and nation branding in order to fight a referendum campaign rather than actually delivering for local communities. And I think Labour has a real opportunity to go out there and speak for those communities. And actually, I think the cooperative family has a huge opportunity to go and make that case for those alternative models for places across the country. On the second point about the right to food bill, look, we have to keep campaigning on this right to food bill. They put it into the long grass. We had a meaningful consultation in the last Parliament. We could have picked up from that meaningful consultation, but it was pushed back from the Greens and the SNP. I think we've got to keep campaigning and shaming them, to be honest, around doing the right thing on the right to food bill. What members can do is get in touch with Rhoda Grant, get in touch with Rhoda Grant's office, support her bill, put pressure on other MSPs and ministers about supporting that bill so we can get meaningful action. But that, I think, leads on to the third question, which is what do we do in the Parliament and how do we do a meaningful opposition in the Parliament? And Daniel Johnson's bill is a good example of that in the last Parliament. I think the challenge we have in this Parliament is now that we have a coalition between the SNP and the Greens, meaning that they have a overarching majority in terms of dictating what happens in the Parliament, but also winning votes in the Parliament, that they are going to be less amenable and open to compromise and to working with other political parties to actually achieve. So I think that gives us challenge in terms of the day-to-day running of the Parliament and how we can get meaningful difference in action. I think we have to shame them into meaningful difference and action. We can't win votes. But I think it also is a huge opportunity for us. I want us to concentrate the next 5 years, recognising we're not going to win votes in Parliament, to go out and win votes in the country. Let's persuade voters to come and support the Labour and cooperative family so we can actually win elections and be the government that can change people's lives across the country. That's the kind of opposition I want us to build. Yes, expose SNP failures, but over the next 4.5 years, let's build the alternative to the SNP and the Tories so people can see we're worthy of government again.
Thank you very much. And I think in those answers, you've answered some of the following, further questions as well, because there was certainly one about how our cooperative values can offer that vision to help win seats for a majority government at the next election in Scotland. And you certainly put that very well. I've got a couple more quick questions, if that's all right.
Yeah, no problem.
Just to ask you, you mentioned ferries. So there is a question about whether the shipyards and ferries could become cooperatives in there as well. Charlie had one around powers to local authorities to develop community wealth building. You did touch a bit on that, but whether there's anything specifically that could empower local authorities. And then there's one last one from Emily, which I think is quite interesting. So what actions can cooperatives implement to end the inequalities that have been exposed through the pandemic in Scotland, but also throughout the UK? So I guess what we can do around the inequalities that have been exposed.
Thanks, Emma. I suppose the end point kind of matches to the final question, which is around co-op values. Now, co-op values can help us build support and build success. I think people recognise the value of cooperatives. I think people recognise the difference that cooperatives can make. I think what we need to win the argument on, and this is on the Labour and cooperative family to do together, is to demonstrate why cooperative values, not just in your community in terms of your day-to-day life, but also in your government and in your local authorities, how those cooperative values driving how a government operates or how a council operates also makes a meaningful difference to your day-to-day lives. And I think that's an argument that I think we can make. And I think quite often Labour is shy about making sometimes, but I don't think we should be shy about that kind of alternative model about what our future looks like. So I want cooperative values at the heart of what we do to actually show that working together, cooperating and building together means we can rebuild our society together, rebuild our communities together, and defeat poverty and inequality together, and have a country that's pulled back together at the same time as well. I mean, lots of people will know this that are watching from other parts of the UK and outside of Scotland. You will feel the divisions of Brexit chaos. We have all those divisions of Brexit chaos layered with the divisions of the yes and no question. And we currently have two governments in Scotland who are actively seeking to divide our country in order to bring electoral success. I think the Labour and cooperative family, through those values, can demonstrate actually there is much that can be achieved when people work together, and there's much to be can achieve in the values of unity and empathy and hope rather than of division and despair. And that is, I think, where we will look at other opportunities. The second question was around ferries. I mean, we're in the unbelievable situation where you had a Scottish government contract to build ferries for Scotland that couldn't be won by a Scottish government-owned shipbuilding company. And so we are sending those ferry contracts instead to either Romania, Poland, or Turkey. And that means jobs not get happening and work get happening here in the UK or in Scotland. If that had been a UK government decision, there would be hell to pay. I remember being part of the campaign to save the government shipyard and to make sure it won MOD contracts. And I actually stood in those campaigns next to members of the SNP, including Nicola Sturgeon, campaigning for those jobs and that work to happen in Scotland. And it is simply unforgivable that in the midst of what was coming now in terms of an economic crisis, in the midst when we're trying to rebuild our economy for the future, and in the midst we have a crumbling ferry infrastructure that's failing too many of our coastal island communities, we are now sending jobs, thousands of jobs, tens of thousands of jobs abroad, and not having those jobs here in Scotland making a meaningful difference. And that's just the latest in a series of examples. When we got this, we created jobs in China for the steel for the Queensferry Bridge. We did the jobs in Indonesia to create the wind farms for our renewable industry here in Scotland, and now we're sending jobs to Turkey, Romania, or Poland in order to build the ferries for Scotland. I want us to have those jobs and the supply chains right here in Scotland to make a meaningful difference. And actually using cooperative models for that, I think, is a very, very strong and credible argument, and one that I'm going to ask not just the Energy Commission to look at, but I'm happy to ask Daniel Johnson, who leads for us on business and the economy, a strong and proud cooperative himself, to look at that in terms of our wider economic strategy going forward. And the final question just around the community wealth building and the challenge for local authorities. So I have tasked a piece of work for us to look at what the next stage of devolution looks like in Scotland. And a key part of what that's going to look at is not just what devolution looks like in terms of Westminster and Holyrood, but actually what devolution looks like between Holyrood and local authorities. And community wealth building is a huge part of that. And I want us to publish, well in advance of the local government election campaign next year, a blueprint for a new settlement for local government that empowers local people, that puts cooperative values at its heart, and makes sure that we put power, wealth, and opportunity in local people's hands and stop this drive for nation-state building that is eating our country alive in terms of widening inequality and increasing poverty.
Thank you very much, and some really important points touched on there, and also be remiss not to mention the local elections next year in Scotland, and encourage people to apply to be Labour and cooperative candidates if they haven't done already. But a big thank you to you, Anis, for joining us today from a very sunny Glasgow. Thank you.
The sun's gone down now. Just when I finish, I'm going to take the kids outside. The sun's gone down.
It's gone back to normal. But thank you very much and giving up your time this morning. Thank you. And it's
my pleasure. Thank you, Emma, and my solidarity and best wishes to everyone watching.
Thank you. So, cooperators, we move on. We are now having a scheduled pause for lunch, go and refuel. But you'll be pleased to know that conference isn't over. It's just the end of this morning broadcast session. We will be regrouping this afternoon, but on Zoom. And it's your chance to participate in the workshops and breakouts that we've got planned this afternoon. So at 1 p.m, we'll be reviewing and focusing and identifying our priorities from this year's social care policy consultation, a really important issue for all of us at the moment. And at 3 p.m, there'll also be a workshop at looking at what we as members can do to protect public service broadcasting and stop Channel 4 being bought by a private equity, something we heard about from Tracy Braben yesterday. You may have already pre-registered to take part, but if you haven't, go to the conference page, and if you're on the page, scroll down and find the link to join. You'll need to register, then you'll get an email to join those Zooms. And if you've not had enough of the conference, well, you'll be pleased to know it's carrying on throughout next week as well. And our equality networks will be holding events in the evenings as well. This is a great chance, if you've not already, to get involved in the work of our equality networks in terms of Co-op Party youth, women, BAME, disability and LGBTQ plus cooperators. It's a chance to meet other members and find out about their work. So please also have a look at those. And finally, we have our business meeting next Saturday. So all members as well as delegates are welcome to attend our annual general meeting, which takes place next Saturday, the 16th of October. Again, on the conference page, you can register for that. You'll also find all our documents and papers needed for the AGM as well. So it just goes for me to say thank you very much for joining us this morning. It's great to be back, great to hear from some amazing cooperators. A big thank you to all our speakers who have joined us this morning, but also the staff behind the scenes that have made it happen as well. So thank you very much, and go and enjoy your lunch.